Yeah, so welcome to another video here from STF Wargaming Studio, and we are going to be talking to Perkins in a couple of minutes. As soon as he just gets online and we get to the appointed time, and everything should be just fine. We're going to be talking about the new Errata coming up and a couple of small little general questions just before we start the actual walk through all the cards. That's actually a fair few this time. We're at 43 cards, I believe, that's actually being changed. So that's a solid errata. So anyway, we'll just take my place, wait for Perkins. We'll be there in a moment. All right, so welcome to us again, Jamie. And it's quite sort of strange to actually have someone not Steve on this podcast. So yeah. We'll make the best of it with you. That's okay.
I'll certainly try.
Very good. Anyway, let's just get straight to it. We're here to talk a little bit about the errata. We're talking more the general things before the actual rules first, and then we'll go into the different major changes first, and then go into the cards and such as we move along. And by the end of it, I hope we'll been able to cover all of them. So I'll just start with what was needed to make the sort of cut for being a part of the errata this time around. What kind of changes did you really want to address in this errata?
Well, there was a couple of obvious ones. Obviously, the new wave of captains has provided a shock to the system for Guild Ball, which is honestly kind of partially what we were hoping it would do. And we were a little bit more, I guess, aggressive with their design space and boundaries than we have been previously, and just noted that basically that we knew that we could have a little bit of reliance upon the fact that we have the 6-month errata scheduled in, so that we weren't intentionally trying to break the models or make them overpowered, but we knew that we could be a little bit more free with how we were designing them and what kind of abilities we could put on them to try and make them as interesting and as fun as possible, knowing that we had the safety net of the 6-month erratas to bring any small bits and pieces back into line. And we've had to do that with a couple of the new captains, and that's kind of fine, really. The general way that we view erratas here at Steamforged Games for living games like Guild Ball is that they don't necessarily represent mistakes. Like, we shouldn't be worried about the fact, oh no, we've had to errata a game. That means we've made massive errors. Although obviously, erratas wouldn't need to exist if everything was perfect. But since a game like Guild Ball has so many moving parts, then erratas kind of form more of a necessary evil in the fact that when you're adding so many new abilities to the game each year, adding so many more models and so many moving parts with not only the abilities and how they interact, but how players can choose to play with them as well. And there can be unforeseen interactions just in terms of how players can choose to position models on a pitch, use a model much more aggressively or defensively than we'd perhaps foreseen. Then we need to be able to have the freedom to make these small adjustments every 6 months to be able to keep the game from getting stale, because it also refreshes the game, but also to make sure it's a fun experience for everyone that's playing the game. So anyway, I've drifted slightly, sorry. So just generally overall, it's good to bear in mind that we see erratas as necessary evils. They are required because there's something that's quite right with the game, but you can turn them into a positive because they serve to refresh and make everything a little bit more fun for people. And Guild Ball now is a game that's 3.5, 4 years old. We're multiple editions of the core rules or changes to the core rules into the game, and we're at a point where we're approaching, we're fast approaching now, getting towards 200 miniatures in the game, 200 individual characters, and we're at the point now where we've done the erratas this many times that we're seeing less and less whole character rejigs and whole rewrites. There are still 1 or 2 of them in here, not as many as there have been in previous erratas or in previous even editions of the game changing. So what we're seeing a lot more now is small tweaks to characters here and there, 1 ability changing, maybe 2 abilities changing, maybe a health point going up or down, and these are quite small, fine changes. And because the changes per model are so often so small and so targeted, this means that we can widen our gaze and look at a larger amount of models per errata than we used to be able to do, whereas we would previously have a small number of models that had quite heavy changes. In addition to that as well, the fact that we've, for the last sort of coming close to a year, we've had digital updates to Guild Ball, where we haven't been supplying cards with miniatures, and we've been heavily reliant upon Guild Ball Manager as a digital support for the game, and cards through the website and print on demand through drive-through cards. People can more easily replace them, well, not more easily, but they can accessibly release their physical cards if they want to, or just do what I do and print off paper copies. It means that we have a lot more freedom to make the exact changes to a miniature or a guild that we want to, rather than having to also confine ourselves to changing the minimum number of cards as possible, because we knew we were going to have to reprint cards that were, replace cards that are out of date. That's no longer a problem for us. So it gives us the freedom to widen our gaze and have a really big errata, which, as I said before, kind of correlates quite nicely with the changes per model are quite small. So when we go about constructing an errata, we'll often, you mentioned making the cut, and what that obviously means for people that don't know is that we will triage the models in the game at any given time. We'll keep an ongoing list, or a watch list as we refer to it. And anything that is causing an issue, or we see as a potential problem in the future, goes onto the watch list. Or this model might be a bit strong, let's put them on the watch list for being too powerful. Or this model's not seeing enough play, let's put it on the watch list for something that needs a buff because we'd like to see it some more. And when it comes around to actually developing an errata, we will go and approach that watch list and then just categorize all of the changes that we would want to make, and then put them in like category A, this change must happen to the health of the game. Category B, this change needs to happen because it's quite important, all the way down to changes that are, we'd like to make this change, but it's a luxury, we don't have to have it, but it'd be a nice to have if we can fit the space. And then we just have to, once we've then determined the size and scope of the errata, which, as I mentioned, because of the reasons I've just outlined, we can generally fit more models per errata than we used to. That'll still give us a number of models that we know we can fit, because we have a finite amount of time that we can spend during our day working on the development of an errata. So we obviously have to make sure that we give appropriate amount of time to making sure that the changes are properly balance tested and proofed, etc. when they go onto the cards. That'll give us a cutoff point where we can go, okay, we can go down to the category B changes, or we can go down to the category C changes this time. And luckily, with the more recent erratas, we've been able to go quite far down the list actually, and include some of the luxury changes that are the nice to haves as well, which is always nice, because those are still very these are still changes that people can get excited about, because there are models that might not have seen much change for a couple of years, perhaps. Anyway, that was a very long-winded answer to that question, but I think it was quite a big question.
Yeah, and you covered at least two. So yeah, by all means, I have another one as well, but you did sort of cover it fairly well. But we can sort of maybe pinpoint it a bit more, since I was actually then I'm going to ask you about this 6-month cycle. If you feel it's working as you hoped it would.
Yeah, I think so. We actually have had, me and Bryce. Sorry, just to cover something else off as well. I was formerly the lead developer of Guild Ball. I have now since handed that responsibility over to Bryce, because I now more manage the development team as a whole. So I don't work as much on Guild Ball as I used to, but me and Bryce will have quite regular conversations about how the game's development is going. One, for a professional reason, and two, just because honestly I'm interested. It's still a game that I love to play. Yeah. But we've had the conversation multiple times over whether a 6-monthly errata cycle is correct for Guild Ball, whether we should shift it to a 4-month errata cycle. Even the question has also been previously whether there should be longer distance between the two, between the cycles. But we think for the moment the 6-month errata cycle is about right, because it strikes a nice balance between. It allows the game to settle down for a little while, people get into a nice rhythm. It can sometimes get a little bit stale, sort of towards the end of this, right at the end, perhaps the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks of the last of a cycle, when people really know an errata is coming, and the game feels like it's sort of in a solved place where most people's lineups at competitive events start to feel a bit similar. But at the same time, 6 months really gives you a solid amount of time to collect data, to know what kind of changes you can make. And it also just takes a reasonable amount of time to develop an errata. It takes us at least sort of 4 to 6 weeks of playtesting time. That's not including any discussions and proofing and graphic design we've got to do on top of that. And then obviously we've got to run up to the release, where we've got about a 2-week bubble of time that we've got to make up for in terms of the Apple approvals for the app for Guild Ball Manager, and also waiting times for the approvals to go through for drive-through cards. So the erratas themselves take quite a long time to develop and then put on to get all the assets ready. Yeah. So it's basically 6 months is feeling about right. We have had discussions for 4, but 6 feels about right for now.
Yeah, well, so far so good. So no need to break something that isn't broken quite yet.
Yes.
Yeah, but another thing that we're talking about that is or isn't broken, we talked about, or just before we sort of get into the actual meat and cards and such, we recently had a beta cycle.
We did.
Yeah. What kind of, you can also just quickly perhaps cover what the changes was and why you did them. And no need to go on a tangent for 10 minutes. That's okay. You can do that. Right?
I'll try. I waffle quite a bit, so I'll try and keep it short. So the recent beta cycle we ran was to cover two particular things. One was to increase the amount of momentum that a player would get for scoring a goal, and the second was to play around this idea of passing activations, of saying, okay, I've lost a model, but that doesn't decrease the number of activations that I have, so I can just pass the turn. And what that hopefully does is it will try to shake up what's going on a little bit in the competitive metagame at the moment, where people are still playing a little bit of a standoffish game, particularly towards the top end of tables, and prisoning models. That would mean one of your models, say with me and you're playing a game, one of your models has been separated from the rest of your team. It hasn't got much support, and I've encapsulated it in the middle of my team, meaning I can hit it whenever I want to generate momentum. I can kind of kill it whenever I want as well. And because it's got so many crowd outs, because it's been prisoned, it's very difficult for you to get it out of there unless you have specific tech for doing that. This playstyle is enhanced by being able to control the first and last activations, because you have this ultimate control of momentum generation. And if you always have 6 activations, being able to pass the turn, you can ensure that you are going to get to go last with somebody, have the last say over momentum generation and who heals the players, and it just helps to break up the power of prisoning playstyles a little bit. And then also just increasing the amount of momentum that a player scores per goal might help encourage people to score goals earlier in the game. Instead of just going for 4 takeouts and then scoring 1 goal to win the game, perhaps they might score a goal a little bit earlier on in the game to put some more pressure on the opponent and basically just give you a little bit more freedom of how you choose to play the game, really.
Yeah, sounds like a good thing. When do you think them, or if they come into the game, what kind of time frame are you envisioning?
So we think that they will. We think that they will come into the game in some form. We've collected a reasonable amount of data, and it was generally all quite positive, and it seems like a positive change for the game. Now, we actually considered putting it into the game during this errata, but then me and Bryce had a good conversation about it, and we discussed that we actually need to take the due time and diligence to go through all of the cards and the abilities in the game and ensure that they all sync up properly with how passing activations would work. So things like superior strategy, casket time, and other small elements like that, linked activations perhaps as well. But other elements that we need to make sure that they are all phrased correctly and we don't create any accidental rules loopholes. So we're just taking a little bit extra time to do that. I don't have an ETA on when it's going to be entering the game yet, but it will be as soon as we can manage that it is reasonable. But as I said, we just need to give Bryce that little bit extra time, and the Lawyers Guild and the rules editors that we have, to make sure that we don't create accidental rules loopholes. But we do like the rules, so you will see them in some form in the near future.
Very good. So that's a bit of a nice tidbit to know for the future. But should we get into some of the meat of this?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a few models that's already been covered by your blog and such, so we won't actually go into those. That would be the cooks. That would be yesterday. We'll talk a bit about the monster in the room and the elephant a little later, but not right now.
Okay.
One of the very interesting things is that I saw this is your choice to actually a very large change with the union. You want to have a little go at explaining your reasoning, how that came about?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that led to this, really, and that obviously we've been gradually removing the union from other guilds as we've been going along since the releasing of the minor guilds last year. And we were slowly moving to a point where the union were eventually going to become their own team. And we're at a point where we've nearly finished that now. I think there's only a couple of teams left that can still use union models. And it's something that we've said and kind of used as an excuse in the past, although it definitely has some grounding in truth, is that the way that the union models work for other guilds has been a bit of a restriction in terms of how we can design and playtest the union themselves, because we don't only have to playtest them within the union as a team, but we have to worry about making sure that they don't break other teams they can also play for. Whereas we know that we're just sort of that close to the end of getting the union out of other teams, and we knew that at the same time in this errata that there was going to be a generally good overhaul of the union overall. It seemed like a good time to be able to do that, so that we could do the exact changes that we wanted to make. Two things that have basically synced up time-wise quite well together. That we knew that there was going to be a large focus on the union. I think they have more individual players being changed in this errata than any other guild. And at the same time, there's not many teams left that also use the union. So, as I say, just time-wise seemed quite convenient.
Yeah, I don't actually see union being used together with many of the guilds either. So I suppose it's a very good time for it.
Yeah.
We can also perhaps insert a joke here about Blackheart, but that would be cruel to Jason, wouldn't it?
Oh, he can always be cruel to Jason. He can take it. He's a tough guy.
Yeah, he can take it. That's all right. Well, you also changed roughly half the models of the Union.
Yeah.
Why not the other half, to be blunt?
So a couple of reasons, really, and it's fine to ask the question. Don't worry about it being blunt. Is that we've changed? I think it's 10 overall if you include Grace and Benediction, and obviously counting Avarice and Greed as separate cards as well. The Union are in a place that it shows the extent to which we're not happy with them. Is that they've had this many changes, and the reason they've had this many changes, I guess, is it's a good illustration of the power jump that happened between season 3 and season 4, and we left the Union alone for the majority of that. They were probably one of the most unchanged guilds, I think, overall. As a result, unfortunately, they were kind of left behind because the game has moved on since then, become more powerful offensively since then, and they needed to be caught up. Now, the reason we haven't done more than this number of changes is because when you are making changes to a guild on this level, this amount of models, then you just need to be making sure that you're not going too far with them, and that we needed to. I guess you could say that we're in a state of fluctuation, and that we're not happy with them, and we needed to stabilize that situation. So the way in which we've stabilized that situation, if we picked a lot of the core models that we know will give the Union a very solid grounding. And what this means is that if we decide we need to make further changes to the Union in the future, then we have that solid grounding with which to leap forward and make further changes. So it basically means that the job might not necessarily be completed with all of the Union, but after this errata, we'll have a really solid picture of where they are and where people think they are as well, and we'll know what we need to do in the future. Whereas, I know it just seemed like if we threw more models in than this 10, then we could have given ourselves a completely different set, an equal number of different set of problems. Whereas I guess the problems in inverted commas that might still be there we also don't know whether they'll just disappear because the solid core of the Union gives them the stability that they need. We might have been fixing problems that we didn't need to fix, or just creating whole new problems that we need to fix next time around. So it's a slightly conservative approach after having realized that we needed to do quite a major rework, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So we'll have a bit to go at the actual cards, and perhaps at some point here we can just do it first, since we actually just talked about them. For example, you have everyone's favorite Avarice and Greed, which has a change at least one every single time we see a change. So
yeah.
My first sort of small impression is basically that there's a slight buff and a bit of a simplification. Would that be about right?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It's probably one of the smallest changes here, and it might even necessarily not be enough for them to make teams, perhaps, but it will at least make them enough for some people to give them a consideration. A little bit of an efficiency buff there for using Greed. The whole package is just a little bit less influence intensive to use, and an extra point of armor and Avarice just makes him obviously that little bit more sturdy, because they are slow. If they reach something, they will break it in half, but at least it's a little bit more cost effective now.
That is very true. So that's basically what you can say about either both these cards. And it is basically a bit more efficiency, a bit more safety with the extra armor. It's nothing really major, as you say. Well, let's have a go at the next one. Let's see, Decimate would be the next one, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I don't see any big obvious changes right here by a quick look at it, at least.
So the main thing for Decimate is the playbook. I don't think anything actually changed on Decimate outside of the playbook. We just wanted to go in and make it a bit more exciting to use, because Decimate has for the longest amount of time been known as that model that will go in and very consistently get you 8 damage and 4 momentum and 4 inches of dodge, because of that momentous 2 damage dodge on the second column being such a consistent result for Decimate, and then occasionally getting a tackle because of anatomical precision as well. But we just wanted to make the top end of Decimate's playbook a lot more exciting, so that if you did spike up and hit 4 hits, hit 5 hits, and 6 hits, then 6 hits was already exciting because of the 1,000 cuts, but more the 4th and the 5th results as just being interesting, and also just giving some better top end damage as well, because we knew that we wanted to increase the amount of damage that the Union had generally just slightly, and then. Also, that 4th column non-momentous 1,000 cuts result is just incredible in certain situations, and I think will really make your opponent think about when to counterattack Decimate, because obviously being a Watchman zone, you'll have counterattack options all the time, but at the same time she's got a lot of dodges to potentially move away. But if you don't counterattack her, you're just letting her very easily have that 1,000 cuts without having to think about if there's anything coming back at her.
Yeah, getting the 1,000 cuts on is quite devastating, can be. And the fact that it seems to actually have a range, which is quite interesting. I actually noticed that, did I? Well, then you learn something new every day about Decimate, I guess. I suppose it's also partly that I don't see Decimate, or when I do see Union, I see Decimate, but I have barely even seen Union in Season 4.
Yeah.
So it's good to see that we actually might see them again. But the next one you have a change on, that is Minx. That's a bit more changes, as far as I can see. The playbook is a bit more efficient, as far as I can see. You have a very interesting combined result on the first column, even.
Yep. So Minx has had a couple of different pieces happen to her. She's had her damage output increased because the 2 has moved down, and she's gained a 4 that I don't think she had before. She has swapped out Furious though for basically for axe throw. Swapped out Furious and Screeching Banshee for axe throw. Now, what this does, hopefully, is this makes her quite a good model in the early turns of the game as well as the rest of the game. Because one of the weaknesses that Union certainly had before this Errata was that they don't really have a particularly strong kicking plan most of the time. They want to receive the ball a lot. And where Minx might not necessarily make the greatest kicker, she could kick off. But what she's really great at is coming up and supporting a kicking model. She could run forwards, jog or sprint. She can axe throw something to snare it and put 3 damage out. She can mark target something as well for your kicking model to go and attack. And then once she's done that, not only has she put snared and damage and marked target out on the opposing model, but if she hits that axe throw, she also then gets to retreat back to the shadows and retreat to relative safety. So she can come up and do quite a lot of useful things for a kicking model to be able to launch off into the enemy team on the first turn.
That's true, and with her damage target as well, makes her charge ridiculous, as she's always had in a sense.
Yes.
But you can also, when going into one model, mark targets for the other ones as well. That makes Veteran Rage a bit of a monster, and our little tiny friends just previously mentioned Avarice and Greed even more dangerous as well. So that's an interesting combination.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just even those non-momentous results where you can hit damage, which will trigger snared, and then also mark target something as well. She's a really nice suite of abilities there. She's kind of like a melee support model for them almost.
Yeah, you do. So she has a little different feeling, but she seems a bit more, not careful isn't quite the right word, but a little bit more reserved compared to her sort of charge like a Screeching Banshee, which she also has lost in the process, I see, which is very suitable.
Yeah. She's a little bit more well-rounded, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the next one up is Rage. And that would be the normal one, or original Rage. So let's see, the playbook seems to be just about the same. Character plays are the same.
Yeah, it's just the heroic on the back. So we considered a couple of different small bits and pieces to Rage, and what we really wanted to do was increase his personal damage output a little bit, because he used to be this really terrifying cruise missile that people would send in to a knockdown target, and you just delete things if you got the correct setup. At the same time, he's this double-edged sword, because if somebody manages to lock him down, prevent him from getting his Furious, he'll often not get a lot of work done. And we want to sort of return him to being able to exercise that playstyle. So because of his heroic now, if you've got some momentum on the board, he can use his tooled up for free on himself, and he can achieve that really terrifying level of damage output on a target he's going into. Alternatively, if he is a little bit more tied up, then you can still tool up himself if you want to make some attacks, or you can much more easily go and tool up a different model, or just put no influence on him at all, and move somewhere and tool up a friendly model without having given him influence in the first place. So a little bit more utility and a slightly higher damage output, personally, was what we were going for there.
Yeah, you also give him a bit more of utility sense, that he isn't useless at any point. Actually, if he's tied up, he can actually do something as well.
Yep, absolutely.
So then we have the normal Rage, or Veteran Rage, yeah? Let's see, quick look through. He seems to be at least fairly similar when it comes to all traits.
So the changes for Veteran Mage are on the front of his card, and that he's been affected by the global change to QuickTime, and that QuickTime has been reduced to cost 1 for everybody across the board. And he increased his influence generation is increased from 3 to 4, so he gives his team an extra point of influence to play with now. And his playbook has been reshuffled to increase his damage. So basically, all of the results he had, apart from his first column, have been shuffled down by 1. So his 2 is now on 2, his 3 is now on 3. He still has Bloody Coin, he still has Red Fury, he still has all those old tricks he used to have. It's just his personal output is now a lot more threatening, and it doesn't feel as much of a penalty if you have to use QuickTime. He still probably doesn't want to use QuickTime because Veteran Mage has kind of the highest value influence in the game, in that he wants to be using them on his own attacks, or he wants to be using them to Red Fury someone else for attacks. But it means that if you have to QuickTime for whatever reason, it's not as much of a penalty to him as it used to be. And you could also foreseeably use it to extend his own threat range and still get some work done.
That's true. As it gone to 1, then that makes much more sense for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it retains his current playstyle. We didn't feel the need to change Veteran Mage's playstyle. He's the original Red Fury. Obviously, Gaffer's had it more recently, but he's the original Red Fury, and that's still a playstyle that works and is quite strong for the Union. It just needed some better numbers.
True. And then we have Snake Skin. That's you get the first or the first one that's really affected by the changes you did to Charmed.
Yes, so I could just talk about this once, which will cover a number of different people, but Charmed has been completely removed from the game, and that's just simply because over time, even though the intent of it was quite innocent originally, the way that Charmed represents male-female models going through the game is not exactly what we wanted it to be. We don't feel like it accurately represents those models very well, and we just decided to take it out and replace it with equivalent rules, whether those models have either generally been given more health or they've been given a better defensive value. And I think one of them got a better defensive value and a bit less health to equate out, but they have roughly been balanced in a similar place to where they were. So for Snakeskin, this means that she's just defense 5 all the time, which gives her actually a slight bump up. But I think that's okay, given that we're trying to buff the Union anyway. So it just means that she's like Velocity now. She can nimble for defense 6 and be a real pain to get rid of.
That she can definitely do. And she still has, she still has Beautiful, yeah. So character plays are not very interesting for her direction anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the last one that has a little bit of changes I see is Strongbox.
So Strongbox is an interesting comparison point to Coin, obviously, in that Coin's quite a strong choice in that he brings his 2-inch mana zone, and back offers giving you an extra influence point for the team. Given how influence hungry the Union are, then that's a lot of the Union players are quite influence hungry. Then that's quite a strong starting point. So Strongbox has to compete with that. So what we did there is we basically doubled down on what Strongbox is already quite good at, which is increasing the quality of the attacks of your entire team. And so we've just basically changed the wording on shelling out, so that instead of having to measure shelling out to the enemy model being close to Strongbox, you measure shelling out to a friendly model close to Strongbox. And that has the effect of increasing its range by about 2 to 3 inches, because instead of measuring 4 inches to an enemy model, you can measure 4 inches to a friendly model. Then you include its base size and its melee zone, and you can reach that aura much further away. At the same time, he is still slow as heck, so you have to understand it's going to take him a couple of turns to get into the correct place. But once he's there, he's also going to be very difficult to remove because he gained 2 health points. And with Tough Hide, that makes him almost not worth attacking a lot of the time because he's that difficult to remove from the table for a mascot. Yeah.
He's also a bit safer when he can rely on the friendly zone instead of the enemy zone as well. Mm-hmm. So for the most part, then you'll have to go through someone else, and in Union, that's not always a good idea to try to go through anyone.
Exactly.
So yeah, there's some interesting good changes there. And maybe we'll see some of the other ones for other Union players in the future, maybe towards the next cycle, depending on how they play out for the next few months.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, there's also Great and Benediction as well, who, although technically auto players, they can play for the Union, so they're relevant to talking about Union changes too.
That was basically going to be my next point.
Sorry, I do apologize. I'm taking over here a little bit.
That is perfectly fine. You're allowed to do that, at least with me. So let's have a go at Grace and Benediction. You can't really talk about one or the other. You might as well have a good go at both of them. You more or less, it feels like you, in at least parts of them, you sort of feel like you just threw out their concepts and remade them, even if they are very similar. You changed some of the really almost basic things for Benediction first, and now he has a very different role, but it's still a very interesting role that I think it's a nice step up, and probably now a very good alternative also within Order, rather than just always taking Fangtooth, which seems to be the default go-to, at least from the ones that I've
played. The situation with the Order particularly has been that you only really have 6 players to play with up until now, because Grace and Benediction just weren't options. They weren't unplayable models in the sense that their abilities weren't terrible, but they just didn't gel very well at all with how the Order wanted to play the game. And quite similar in some respects for the Union, with the exception of how Impart Wisdom or Impart Faith, I can't remember which one it was, which everyone used to work with Veteran Rage, extending the range of Red Fury. So we had to go back and revise how Benediction and Grace works, and basically update them to how the Order actually work now. Because remembering that Grace and Benediction were the first ever Order models, but at the same time, they were developed and released before we even knew that there was going to be an Order as a guild. So they had this very early stage idea of what we thought the Order team might play like if they were ever released together, and then the eventual Order team just didn't go in that direction. They went in quite a different direction, in fact. So this is a good opportunity to update Grace and Benediction to get them more in line with how the Order as a minor guild actually plays. So this is why Grace is so important, that she has been turned into this really important battery model for both the Order and the Union. Where if you want to, you can get a good effect out of her by just giving her 0 influence, because she gets her free character play each turn, both of which very handy at different times. Quick foot on the first turn, healing light at any point once the teams have engaged, very useful to have for free. And then when she's playing with the Order, having Reclamation, because just being able to once per game go, oh, you were smart enough to take the ball of light away from me and kick it into the corner. Well, actually, I've just got it back. And not being able to repeatedly do that, but being able to do that once and having that ace card up your sleeve means that the ball of light will be in play and relevant for the Order for most of the game. But you know that in doing so, you are bringing a model that will probably do a little bit less work personally than someone else might do, such as Mist.
Well, she's also
with
a respectable 3-8 kick, which also makes her very viable for just nipping in a goal here or there.
Yeah, absolutely. Not necessarily perhaps the best at getting it back, because she's got that tackle on 2 with tackle 4. But yeah, if you've got the ball in play and you're not having to retrieve it from an enemy model, she's got a solid kickstart for moving around, which is obviously very relevant for the Order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a big impression that you should perhaps consider renaming them to something like Pinball Order or something like that. But
yeah, possibly the Order of Pinball.
That's for next Errata.
Yeah, I like it. And Benediction, that rolls into Benediction quite well, actually, because his Impart Wisdom or Faith, can't remember what it was, it was useful for Veteran Rage and Veteran Rage alone. It didn't really have a use within the Order at all. It had a very specific use where you could I'm open Mist only if Mist was more than 6 inches away from Brisket, but within 8 inches to be able to kick to Brisket. And it's just like such a corner case use that didn't really have a justification for existing. So we took it away and came up with a different rule, which would gel him much more into how the Order want to play, which is obviously giving a model a free kick once per turn. So it just means that they have such an unpredictable play style. And one of the downsides sometimes of kicking models that want to play with the ball is their influence allocation. If you haven't quite got your influence allocation correct, and then a scatter takes the ball towards a play you didn't give any influence because you didn't think they were going to get the ball, that can be such a problem for some kicking teams. Like Fisher, particularly susceptible to it. Whereas with the Order, you can have models that don't have any influence at all, but if they're near Benediction and they happen to pick up a ball, they can just go and do a free kick, which allows them to be a little bit more flexible with influence and to be able to adapt to the changing situations on the pitch as well. And outside of that, just adding not only regeneration to himself but to a whole team just means you can take either the Order or the Union can just take that much more of a punch from nickel and dime damage or from condition damage and come out on top. So that being able to heal your whole team once is super strong.
Very, very much so. It seems to be a very interesting defensive tech piece, and that I think is very useful for Order. You also have Stand Firm that can, I am sure, come in very much in handy at times for both guilds.
Yeah, absolutely. And Benediction still represents that rock that you can just plant in front of an enemy team and know that he's going to be able to survive at least a couple of activations before he gets taken out. Particularly because he's got such a, as you say, such a strong counter attack with a good solid 2-inch mana zone.
Yeah. He both has to stand firm and braced, just in case you really feel like that next charge of yours is, well, I'm just going to ignore it.
Yeah. For that one time, you really just have to stand in front of someone and say no.
Some very good changes, I think, for the Union that can very much hopefully that we can maybe start to see some of those models back in active play again.
Yeah, for sure. I think that we've done a reasonable go at achieving the goal I set out at the start, where we want to attack and improve the core of the Union. I think that we've had a reasonable go at doing that.
Yeah, I think so. So we'll see how it plays out for the next months, and yeah, I think it'll be interesting to go at it. We got through Union in good order, and the Order in good order. There was a pun there somewhere that I missed totally, but damn it. Oh well, anyway, I think we need to have a quick walk through the beast in the room, shouldn't we? Yeah. We should
indeed.
Yeah, that is of course provided there's an internet left after the inevitable meltdown that was yesterday. So assuming there's an internet still and people are listening to us, then yes, let's have a little look at the big boar.
So Veteran Boar was one of these players that definitely encapsulates what I was talking about before, where we really wanted to push the boundaries of what was possible with the game. And Veteran Boar, because he doesn't bring his own strict damage buff in the sense of a +1 to damage, obviously he's got singled out he has to apply personally, but because he doesn't bring that strict damage buff like the Owner or Get 'em Lads or anything like that, and he doesn't have the personalized unbuffed pace of Fillet, then we just needed to make sure that he had his own strength, which was attacking the efficiency of the team, and he just brought a heck of a lot of extra attacks and influence to the table, and he brought a bit too much. So at the same time, though, when making the changes to Boar, we didn't want to remove the thing that makes him unique. So we didn't want to remove his massive efficiency from the table, which is why we didn't massively impact his influence output. So his influence generation did drop from 4 to 3. But that, if you're including Berserk, removes 2 potential influence from the table, I guess. But otherwise, he's kept his efficiency overall. What we decided to do instead was sort of take bits and pieces out of various smaller elements of War, which overall adds up to quite a big change. So he's lost his lower combined GB and damage result from his playbook, for instance, so we can't as easily trigger his own Berserk and put Stagger and singled out. He's dropped a point of movement as well, so he's not quite as easily reaching his enemy team, which will again highlight the strengths of Fillet, and to a degree Ox, who is also a bit quicker as well. And we've dropped his health by 2 points, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it will just bring him into the capacity of being able to be dealt with by a couple more of the higher damage output models in the game in one go. And I think that was it. Yeah, everything else about him is unchanged. Bloodlust still works the same. He still has his Furious and giving everyone else Furious. He still has Stagger and singled out, although obviously his combined damage DB result is higher up now. It's on 5 rather than on 2. And overall, this should hopefully bring him back into line where whenever we make changes that are bringing a model down, we want to make sure that they're still being played, people are still having fun playing with them, and hopefully having fun playing against them as well. And we think that there's a measured change to Boar that will make him a playable model without making him feel oppressive.
Yeah, that's true. You did reasonably or a very good go at bringing Thresher down from the first time he was too far out there. It feels like you probably hit the right spot, but again, that's something we just have to see in the next couple of months if it actually is enough of a change. But I think it is. Should we do the other butchers as well?
Yeah, we can quickly cover them. Original Brisket has been affected by the Charmed change. I think she gained a single point of health just to match her to Veteran Brisket, so she's a defense 4-on-1 with 13 boxes, but also still has unpredictable movement, so still relatively strong defensively. And she's seen a relatively good pick rate because of Above and Beyond giving you extra influence, so we think that will be okay for her overall. Veteran Brisket has also been affected by a global change, but to quick time. This is going in the opposite direction. This is technically a slight buff to the Butchers, but this is to a model that doesn't see much play anyway. So quick time just going to cost 1 without any other change on Veteran Brisket should hopefully help her see the pitch a little bit more often. So nice and simple ones there.
Yeah, nice and quick. That's not bad from your side. That's impressive, Perkins. That's impressive.
I did it in under 1,000 words. I think I did pretty good there.
Yeah, it's a great improvement. You should let Bryce know and give you a cookie or something. I think that sounds like a good reward for such a nice short answer.
So there are going to be people that are wondering why Morn is on this errata, I think, considering that the Morticians overall are in quite a healthy, strong position. They Scalpel certainly one of the stronger captains in the game, and Obvious not far behind, and so a very solid roster of squaddies. And so when I want to return to this notion of triaging what changes we should and shouldn't make in an errata, because that should hopefully attack this question quite head on. And one of the things that we always place on a higher level of priority is captain selection rates. Player selection rates are obviously important to get right, but if there is one player that isn't seeing the table as much in a team that is otherwise working as intended, that's not as much of a problem as a captain that is also doing that, because that means, to take the Alchemist as a prime example, and we might get them again later, because Midas hasn't been seeing play for the last sort of year or so, that has meant that Alchemists have felt like a one captain guild, which not only puts them at a disadvantage, but also just makes them less interesting, because captains are such a key piece of how you build your team and how they function together. And it's just nice to make sure that the captain selection rates are equaled out as much as possible, because it gives you so much more bang for your buck when you're playing with a guild to know that you've got multiple captains to choose from. And Morn selection rates were just not high enough. And as a Mortician player myself, having got her out of playtesting and then onto the competitive tables, onto casual games, I can understand why Mortician players weren't wanting to play with Morn. I wasn't. I haven't taken Morn to a single tournament because I didn't feel like I wanted to, honestly. So we had a little bit of a look at Morn, try and equalise that selection rate out and give you a little bit more variety in Mortician opponents. It comes onto her.
What I also saw in some of the communities, and also from my own as well, is they're also asking why, or will be asking as well, why is Scalpel not in an errata compared to Morn, for example?
So Scalpel, I mentioned the watch list before. Scalpel's definitely on the watch list. She's one that me and Bryce had numerous conversations about, and there was certainly a time at which she could have been. There are certain small changes that we could have made to her, but when we looked at the kind of changes that we have made to Scalpel at this time right now, the change would have been that small that it possibly wouldn't have been worth making, and that's an area of the errata that we realized that we could cut down, because even though we are working with a larger scale errata than we ever have done before, and we have more freedom than we have done before, we still have upper limits as to what we should do. We shouldn't just throw a card onto it just because we can. It should have a definite reason for needing to be there. And we just didn't feel like the scale of change that we would make justified her place in the errata. But to try and have people rest assured, she is absolutely on the watch list.
Mm-hmm.
And if she, she's nobody's immune to being changed by Guild Ball erratas. Anybody that remembers what happened to Morticians a few seasons ago will understand that. That even a developer's favorite team is not exempt from negative change. So rest assured that Scalpel's on the watch list. We'll keep a close eye on her. If she is a problem after this errata, then it is undoubted that she'll be hit by the next one.
Sounds good. We need to go through and actually look at what changes that's come to Morn. And we'll have a look at their little under guild as well. And Rat Catchers, they have one player changed as well. So just walk us through Morn.
So Morn had a couple of small bits and pieces done to her. We didn't change her overall identity. What we did is we made a little bit less coach-like, I guess. We made her a little bit less passive because one of the things that's important about playing a team that is entirely based on control, like the Morticians, is that you have to feel like at any point in the game you can exert a degree of agency on the game. But you should never feel that you're out of options or that there's nothing you can do to impact the game. And Morn felt like that at times, like that she was waiting for the opponent to come and interact with her. which is not something that Scalpel or Abyss ever really suffer with. They can go and, if they want to, it might not always be necessarily the most favorable situation, but they can go and choose to get themselves involved in the game kind of at any point they want to, if they haven't activated. So we need to give Malice, Morn a little bit more of that, of those options. Starting off with an easy one is Malice. That doesn't necessarily change the problem I've just described. What it does is just generally give her a bit more of a power bump and allow her to use Malice multiple times per turn. She obviously has been affected by the global change to quick time. Again, doesn't necessarily attack the problem I've stated yet, but it does just generally give her a little bit of an uplift. The main changes to Morn are on the back of her card when it comes to the traits and the fact that she's gained a brand new legendary. So a legendary play allows, this is what I'm really talking about when I say it allows her to get involved with the game at the time of her choosing. Because what could happen before with Morn is you might want to aggressively throw your team into the opponent's face, but there was nothing holding them in place. If you shifted Morn up the table first to get her Grave Candle auras in place for her team to follow her, there was nothing preventing the opponent from just going, okay, well, I'm just going to step back out of range. So if you want to come and get me, you've got to step outside of Grave Candle, which is not something the Mortician player wants to do. So once per turn, this means this means that Morn can run forwards, get a couple of enemy models within range, and say, "I'm now going to legendary. You can't escape unless you've got really good access to dodges, but you can't escape, and there's going to be a fight this turn, whether you like it or not." So she can go and get herself involved in that game. The second part of that is the replacement of Fated with control strings, and some Mortician players will kind of rue the loss be upset at the loss of Fated because having those rerolls was a very strong mechanic, but control strings just gives her such an increased amount of flexibility to be able to edit where her powerful auras are on the pitch. So if Grave I was often finding that someone was stepping back and going, "You can charge me, I'm within your charge range, but to get to me, you're going to have to charge outside of Grave Candle." As I mentioned, is not something the Mortician player wants to do at all. So this means with control strings, every activation, you've got the potential chance to edit where those auras are and move Grave Candle forward, move Grave Candle backwards, or move even the legendary. So somebody who isn't quite in Haunting Gaze yet, they might go, "Oh, I'm 2 inches outside of the legendary, it's fine. I can activate later in the turn and run away." If you leave it too long, Morn's going to creep up the pitch further and further and catch more of your players in Haunting Gaze and make sure that you can't escape, which is, I don't know, it's really quite cool to me and quite an interesting piece of imagery. It's also good for keeping Morn safe. So if she's ever at a point where she's personally threatened quite a bit, you can start adjusting her position backwards, getting her out of gang ups and crowd outs. Just as I say, being a bit more in control and exerting agency. And the last part of that is the swapping of Rising Anger to Creeping Dread. So instead of being reactive, waiting for the opponent to hit Morn, which they almost never would unless she's the last model standing, instead, just at the start of Morn's activation, she's gaining 2 more momentum points. This would allow you to fill a momentum hole that existed there before, where Mortician teams are quite reliant upon their captains to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to momentum generation, particularly Scalpel teams. And when you are playing with Morn, you'd have to kind of find this sort of momentum opportunity to be able to activate Morn, because she won't get any momentum for you using her abilities or her attacks, or very little momentum anyway. So being able to get momentum just for free for activating her allows you some momentum to be able to, for lack of a better word, afford the Morn activation, put Malice out there, get all your buffs out, and then move on to your output players later on in the turn. So it's kind of like Bob in a reverse manner, in that there's a lot of small things that add up to quite a lot. And then a nice big ability in the change of gaining a legendary.
Yeah, it's a very interesting type of legendary as well. AoE, what's it called again? The one that, oh god, Neuron. Yeah.
They don't have to move directly towards her, but they can. So they can move in sort of an arc around if they want to. But it basically prevents them from running away, at least.
Yeah, it essentially creates a scrimmage on Morn's, on her behalf, or when she wants it.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, with the combination of control strings and quick time, she's actually fairly slippery as well if she needs to be.
Yeah, that's why. Sorry, there was one other change I missed. That's why her base move had to come down from 6/8 to 4/6, just in respect of the fact that she has gained a bit of pace in using strings. So yeah.
That's true. That is a change that I didn't notice either, really. But that is definitely a thing when she has that kind of movement. But sure, that makes good sense. Scourge, that's a mighty big fellow you have here.
It's got good feet for a big man, as some would say. So catches are probably one of, if not the most difficult team to develop. they're just such a weird indirect team, even by Mortician standards. And one of the flex points that we have discovered for being able to edit the balance of minor guilds is that we know that we have a lot more freedom to edit the models that only play for the minor guild, and this gives them the freedom to be even more powerful than equivalent models in a major guild. So Rundas and Azimuth are good examples of this, where they are perfectly fine within the minor guilds that they can play for, but you probably couldn't put them in a major guild because they'd probably be too strong. And the thing with the rat catchers is those two models for the rat catchers are Miasma and Scourge. And neither of them is a particularly good football player, but this is a guild that we have said needs to have a goal-scoring focus. True. So it's a bit of a weird mismatch there of we've discovered a good flex point. We can't really use it to its fullest advantage without completely rewriting the models, which we didn't want to do. At the same time, we knew we wanted to buff the rat catchers a little bit more, because even though there are players like Henry Kay who are able to go and win small, medium events with them, do quite well, they're a team that has a good high, Nicholas Ledden as well, has quite a good high skill ceiling. Their skill floor and their new player friendliness is not quite as good as we'd like. So we wanted to add another ability that made them a little bit more user-friendly. But it had to be to do with using the ball, which is where Good Feet for a Big Man comes from, where this ability would not be okay in a team that has out-of-activation pass actions like the Order does, because the rat catchers don't have any of those at all outside, they're not for passes anyway. They've obviously got Reverie for goals, but they don't have it for pass actions. This just means that you've got some much more flexibility for moving the ball around, and particularly editing where Scourge's position is. Because not only can you generate more momentum by passing the ball to Scourge, but if you're feeling a little bit bold or brave, or if Scourge is within tap-in range of a friendly model, he could free pass to someone else to dodge 4 inches forwards and extend his melee threat range as well. So yeah, just does a couple of small interesting things, but overall is quite a decent efficiency buff for the rat catchers.
Yeah, it is. And as you say, it's an interesting way of getting him a little bit of a threat extension at times as well. So it's I think it will be interesting to see how that works out for the guild. I think it will be interesting. I'm actually looking at or working on just starting to paint them up as well now properly. So it should be interesting. I'll certainly have a good play around with it when I get to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you've been a busy boy, and we actually have another guild that actually seen a significant amount of changes. The model just isn't the same when we're looking at it, today.
Yeah, so we've got one of our complete rewrites here. Most of the changes for the Masons are quite slight, actually, but yeah, with Brick, there is one example of a complete rewrite.
Yeah, so, let's have a go at the Masons then, and just start off with Brick and walk us through the changes on him, because they are quite significant.
So Brick is, or was, the original countercharge bot in the game. The thing is, and this is being honest, being driven by more my own opinion than anything else, I don't think that countercharge in the prevalence that it used to be, particularly when you had like double countercharge on Masons in Season 3, I don't think it's a healthy thing for the game. I don't think it's a healthy play experience at all. For most people, the only time when countercharge is a positive experience is when you have two quite high level players that know and remember countercharge is there and are playing around it or positioning to allow it to happen, and it never gets triggered. Because the moment that countercharge actually gets triggered, it tends to ruin games or end games or do do things in quite a significant negative manner just because somebody forgot about it. Personally, not a fan. It is still in the game in different bits and pieces. Obviously, we'll get to him soon, but Marbles still has it and doesn't need to be around Brick to have it anymore. So there are other models in the game that still have it, Tater and I think Compound, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be, and it's on the Perkins hit list. I'm not a fan of the ability because it's not a fun experience. So because this was such a central part of Brick's identity, this meant that we had to completely rewrite the model and make him just do something different and be good at a new thing. And the thing is, the Masons already have quite a number of quite good midfield enforcers in the form of people like Granite and Tower. And so we just needed to have Brick fit into that in a way that was unique. And the way I think we've done that is by making him sort of the ultimate push bot of the team that isn't Hammer. And in the fact that he has access to very, very solid push moves and gives everyone around him free counterattacks as well, so that he can use those on counterattacks and the other Masons can use their good counterattacks as well, which might be even further buffed by having the overlapping abilities of, say, Sturdy from Tower, so that you always get your counterattack. And just allows him to be a really solid midfield enforcer for pushing people around and editing a melee zone. Editing a melee. And also gaining a point of armor, allowing him to play a bit more aggressively in that role as well, so he can be the first point of contact if he needs to be. especially with that really solid counter attack, as I mentioned before. And if he needs to be as well, he can be a bit of a backup damage dealer because he does have that standard non-momentous 4 damage at the top end of his playbook that a lot of Masons do have. So and he's also picked up gravity well as well from Locus. So he's going to be, even though he still has his 1-inch mana zone, he's quite difficult to get around. You're going to have to deal with him in one way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. And he still has knockback and such as well. So he, as soon as you even get close to him, you have to deal with him in one way or another.
Yeah. That effectively means he has a knockdown push on 1, or a double push on 1, or a triple push on 2. So yeah, he's got some strong counter attacking capacity.
Yeah, he does. His movement feels a little faster too, isn't it?
Yes, he's gone up from 4.6 to 5.7 as well. So yeah, he's a little bit quicker.
Yeah, actually, for the change from 4 to 5, actually always feels big somehow.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
But anyways, we had a very interesting. It's a big change. I'm very curious as to how the Masons players actually will receive it. If it's they feel it's too similar to Granite or not. But I think it should be probably different enough since he does a heck of a lot more pushes than she does.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very different player to Granite. Granite's kind of the person that just wants you to be in her melee zone.
Yeah.
And be sad about it. Whereas Brick is he kind of doesn't want you in his melee zone. He's trying to push you away and get you away from the team, or at least push you into an awkward position, such as into Granite's melee zone.
For example, or into the loving arms of Hammer.
Yes. Very loving arms.
Mm-hmm. He has a lot of loving he can give out. But let's not get into too much erotic chatter here, shall we? We need to move on to the other ones as well. So
Mm-hmm.
So
this one, there's a couple of models in here that are just phrasing changes or phrasing rewords. So I think this one is just the back of her card ability. One of them, it was referred to as, I think, as an aura or a pulse, and we just needed to check up that phrasing. So it wasn't actually a balance change here. It was just making sure the traits on the back of the card were worded correctly. That's all it was.
And to answer the big thing on the internet, Corbelli got a change.
He did.
Yeah. So want to walk us through those?
A couple small bits about Corbelli, and it's kind of a similar conversation to Veteran War in the sense that Corbelli was bringing something quite unique to the table in making space, and we wanted to protect that ability, just as we have done, say, Voodoo Strings on Scalpel. That's one of the defining features of her, and Bloodlust is on Boar. So what we did is quite early on said, this ability is locked, it's not changing, and we need to make the rest of this model work around this ability, and that's what we've done. So this is why, say, his legendary playmaking in the game has it's been decreased in ability by 50%. It's lost one entire half of his legendary play, where he can now only pick up a free ball. It can't take a model off an enemy model anymore. And that's an enormous change. It's a really big piece of his kit, but at the same time, making space is such an enormous part of Corbelli's power budget that we have to account for, that he's just going to have to lose some power elsewhere to make him okay to play against. And the legendary dropping down to not being able to take it off any model is that part of it, because Corbelli is otherwise quite capable of going in and tackling a model. He's got a lot of momentous dodges, double dodges. He can get there if he needs to and tackle it himself personally. Yeah. And now we're just making him have to rely on that quite naturally good footballing ability that he has. And on top of that as well, making him a little bit more, I guess, for lack of a better word, sort of sharkified in that he isn't the best person in the world for taking people out. Because that momentous 2 damage that used to be on 2 and now going to 3, he can still inflict momentous damage, but you have to do more setup, and it's probably just not worth it. Whereas it was coming a little bit too easy for him before because of the way that he could maneuver his team around. It could be occasionally quite easy for him to set up gang ups enough for him to deal a significant amount of damage. And now that's just a little bit less effective for him. That's
very true. So you have some interesting interactions with him now, and I think he'll do well enough, I think. And you also have he has plenty of opportunities for footballing, and he's still an excellent footballer.
Yes, he is.
You're not as oppressive as he used to be. He was almost a little too simple, and he basically made the Shark seem rather dull boy somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I never really prescribed to that argument myself because yes, I get it. In a vacuum, Core Belly it was better than Shark, but there's a massive difference in the support that Core Belly had against what Shark has. Shark can have the ideal, perfect footballing supporting team around him, whereas Corbelli kind of has to make do with a number of models. Like he has one pure goal scorer, I guess, in terms of Flint, but he didn't have the rest of that footballing support. He doesn't have a Siren, except himself as on legendary, I guess, but he didn't have a Siren to support him with. He doesn't have a Sakana. He doesn't have those other dedicated strikers or grayscales or somebody to go and do ball retrieval and go and chase down balls. He had to kind of do a lot of it himself. So I'm not necessarily sure that was necessarily true overall, whilst it definitely was true in a vacuum, but I don't think that's a fair comparison because of the team around them.
Very good. And anyways, Flint didn't see much of a change, but he does get the change as everyone else that had Charmed.
Yeah, so Flint is another one of these models that gained a point of defense instead of having Charmed overall. So this means that he is just defense 4 and arm 1 all the time. He did have another small change, though, which was his momentous tackle result now has a dodge on it as well. So like a number of the other 1-inch strikers that we've seen around recently, Edge, great example, and Lane, another one as well. 1-inch melee on strikers, therefore getting a tackle with a dodge on the first column result. Just nice and handy way for them to get the ball off other 1-inch melee zone models.
True. So yeah, that's a nifty little change as well. And we have Harmony and her sister. We perhaps should just talk about them in one go. Then again, the honor change is actually quite solid as well. I quite like those changes. So perhaps we should have a go at honor first and then mention her sister as well.
Sure. So honor saw quite significant power level changes, but we didn't really change how she operates very much at all. We always want to be super careful when it comes to the original season 1 captains, which will hopefully underpin sort of how strongly we felt about Midas having done so many changes to him historically. But with the season 1 captains, we always want to be super careful because they represent the origin, the core of where a lot of these guilds came from. They were the first captains. And Honor has a special place among those first captains because she has always represented the center of the scale, like the footballing, takeouts, control, and tempo. And she is always meant to be the exact center of that scale. So we didn't want to make any major changes in terms of how that operates, just really bump up a power level, which is why Superior Strategy has had its cost scythed right through. We considered dropping it down to cost 3 and still giving you a free influence point, but we just thought we want to make this such a key ingrained part of her identity that we want to make it so cheap that you probably feel like you have to use it every turn. And that's fine. We kind of almost want Honor's team to play with 7 activations. Obviously, there's got to be a cost for that because that's super powerful. But yeah, that's why it's come down to cost 2. It doesn't give you the additional influence anymore. But yeah, just is now such a key. It should and is now will probably be an ingrained part of her identity. She also got hit by the global QuickTime change as well, and we made her 1 damage on the first column of Momentous because it just syncs up a little bit better with how Mason playbooks are supposed to be designed. A bit easier access to momentum now. But that change to Superior Strategy I think is going to be a massive difference for her.
Yeah, it will change quite a bit. Now, she still has her legendary if she needs that little extra influence in any case.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't forget Harmony as well.
So main changes for Harmony were based on the fact that we kind of wanted to make her a little bit more independent from Honor, and that she still gets a buff from family from activating near to Honor, but we had this very feast or famine problem with Harmony, in that if Honor was taken out before Harmony got to activate, you not only lost Honor's activation, you also lost Harmony's access to the family buff, which is pretty massive. And it was pretty swingy as well, and how good she was in a particular turn. So increasing her base stats to be an attack 5 and a kick of 3, which means that you still benefit from having those family buffs from Honor. But if you have to activate in a situation where you don't get them, it's not the end of the world for her. She can still have a reasonably sound activation.
That's very true. So I think it's a decent change, and she still has all her normal toolkit as well. So she's a very respectable, both an okay damage. She has a very good tackle, and she has her weak point as well that can in some cases be very useful to put into a team.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a nice little suite of abilities. She can be a very handy off striker or a very handy off damage dealer, whatever on any to be really, which is quite fitting given what we want the Masons to be overall as a team.
Yeah, and then we need to end with a monkey.
Yeah. So the one of the other issues we've had with the Masons development has been that there have been too many models, in my opinion, that have been chained together. So if you take Honor, you kind of have to take Marbles because you want access to assist. If you're taking Honor, then you kind of might as well take Harmony because you get to benefit from Linked. And if you're taking Honor and Harmony and Marbles, you might as well take Rick because he was giving Marbles his counter charge and he was giving Harmony extra armor being around. And those 4 models, that was quite a lot of monster chain together. I think we've now quite nicely removed Brick from that completely. So you can take Brick wherever you like. And you're not feeling like you have to take Marbles with them anymore. You can now take Marbles independently as well. You could, in theory, take Marbles with Corbelly, take Marbles with Hammer, and you're not really seeing a decrease in output there because you're getting the standard suite abilities in terms of goad and countercharge. And that's all it really is, really. It's just we always thought Marbles was working relatively well. We just want to give him a little bit of independence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And that's now, for example, the independent countercharge as well also makes him now the only one with countercharge in Masons. That also makes him quite valuable in his own sense as well.
Yes, it does. Just for the matchups where you feel that countercharge is more valuable than others, then it means that you don't have to take that package of Marbles and Brick together. You can just take Marbles and you've ticked that box.
Yeah. So that's a very good change, I think. But why did you feel all the changes was sort of necessary? This is actually fairly a comprehensive list in the Masons. Do you feel like they were falling down a little from grace, so to say, or?
A little bit. I mean, Corbelly was bringing them up, but we've already kind of addressed that the problem there is that Corbelly was a bit too strong, and just bringing up the entire guild on his own didn't feel fair. We wanted to give them a little bit more of a well-rounded power, so you could see a bit more of Honor, and obviously, Hammer. Still seeing Hammer a little bit, but a bit more of Hammer and a lot more of Honor, and still seeing play for Corbelly as well. Just needed to give the Masons a much more well-rounded power budget, a spread of power at least for them anyway. And they've just been one of the underperforming guilds, with the exception of being captained by Corbelly. So hoping that overall these changes will do is to give us a much more well-rounded guild experience.
That's good. We're at a good footballing stage, so let's go through quickly the small changes we have for Siren and for Ed. Siren is just a charmed, I believe, and then Ed has a bit more changes if you walk through those as well.
So yes, so normal Siren was just affected by original Siren, so it was just affected by the charm change. So she like Flint gained a point of defense permanently, so she's just defense 5 all the time now. And she's a model that had started to drop off a little bit sometimes in appearances, so it was fine for Siren to receive that small buff. Then we got Ed as well.
Yeah, we got Ed as well.
Yeah, and for Ed, there's only a small change there. This was because the Navigators overall were quite happy with how they perform. They're quite a good, strong, solid minor guild. There was just one thing they were having a bit too much of an issue with, and that is high armor stacking. So Masons, certain models in Masons and Blacksmiths, a bit too much of a problem trying to crack that heavy armor because of how it affects their low number of dice pools. And it doesn't matter if you can re-roll a die if you're not getting to roll it in the first place, or if you know it's just going to be taken off regardless of whether you hit or miss because of the high armor. So increasing Sprung or Leak to reduce armor by 2 just gives them a little bit more tech into those matchups and allow them to play a much more fair game.
No, that makes sense. All right, so we will just moving towards the start of the alphabet. So we're actually going to go at the Hunters, and they have 2 changes. First, Egret.
So yeah, Egret is seeing a little bit of play now with Steeljaw, in that she's able to sit behind this wall of traps and just pings poison flurries at people. So I imagine that the change we put onto Egret will probably not be super heavily felt by Hunters. It might be. Basically, she's gained close control, and we've compressed her first column result into that momentous tackle dodge that we're seeing on a number of 1-inch striking models, which should hopefully make her a little bit more of a better opportunistic striker, because she can go and tackle the ball, dodge, and shoot. And she's having gained close control. She's a model that can sit safe with the ball for a few activations, depending on who's coming after the ball. This will probably be more impactful for the Falconers, I imagine, than it will be for the Hunters, because they are in desperate need of a place to hide a ball, where they have some quite coin flippy matchups right now, where or not coin flip matchups, but they're playing a tournament with Falconers can feel a little bit like Russian roulette, where there's some matchups that you're perfectly happy into, and matchups where you're playing against high tempo of goal scoring, you're just not happy into at all, because they don't really have a good place to hide the ball where they need to for a turn or a couple of activations. And Egret should hopefully give them access to that when they really need it.
Yeah, and then we have J-Car as well. It seems like he has this kind of perfect place already. So what did you feel? Why did he need to change?
Well, I don't know if it's perfect. He kind of dropped out of favour from a lot of Hunter players, what I'd seen recently. And that's mainly, I guess, down to that, what we talked about before in terms of the damage output and the offensive output change from Season 3 to Season 4 is just higher. And J-Car was in a similar place to Decimate, really, where you were expecting this constant supply of Momentous 2s out of him. And it's just not good enough for Season 4. So we just needed to make his 3 damage a little bit more accessible. So it's been moved down to the 4th column, and he has it as a Momentous result now, where he didn't used to have a Momentous 3 damage. It used to just be non-Momentous, I think, on 5 hits. And a little bit easier access to his Gilbo results as well for putting gut string on people. Combined damage and Gilbo results being particularly effective as well if you can afford to not take the momentum. And yeah, so this will just hopefully serve to increase his damage overall, because he's hitting that 3 Momentous damage a little bit more easily.
And the getting on the 3 on the 3rd for him is fairly consistent with attack 6 as well. So he will get his gotten string and 2 damage in many cases fairly comfortably.
Yeah, I think so. And then from there, he could spring up into that Momentous 3 if he wants to, or the Momentous 4 if he gets lucky.
That is true. And he also has the push dodges in case he wants to trigger the traps as well. So he has a lot of good options.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but now we've basically gone through the forest, and now we need to go to the farm. That segue was absolutely amazing. I need to do that again some other day.
It was perfect. I apologize. You didn't get a reaction in from me that rewarded the quality of that segue. It was good.
Yeah, I was genuinely surprised that I managed to get it out good myself. I'll enjoy it. Anyway, we have 3 players that got a good change, and I know at least some people in my community will be screaming your praises. Others will be wondering where your mind is at. But, let's have a go at Grange, because I think he had some interesting little tidbits to work on.
Yeah, so there's certainly the opinion out there that Grange's biggest problem is Thresher, which I can certainly see. There is definitely damage, just a quality power level out disparity between the two of them is what I was trying to get out. And we had some choices to make there, and the choice we decided to make was to buff Grange. Reason being is that we think with a number of the changes coming forwards, there's a number of changes that are going to buff goal scoring teams, both in this errata. And I mentioned earlier as well that the beta changes are going to be coming in at some point in the future as well, which will also help to weaken prison playstyles and buff goal scoring teams. Both are things that Grange is a little bit susceptible to, because he likes the prison playstyle. And even though he can score 1 goal very easily with all of his very high kick stats, what the farmers are not good at is scoring consecutive goals. So we're going to have a bit of an issue keeping hold of the ball and slowing those teams down, which is how we've reasoned basically that we needed to increase Grange's capacity a little bit. Overall, what we've done is made Constitution much more cost effective. It doesn't just affect one model now; it affects everything around Grange. So we already know that the farmers like to stay quite tight and packed together anyway already, and they're going to buff. So they're going to benefit quite a lot from Grange's multiple aura abilities. And on top of that, he also generates an extra point of influence for them as well now. So playing with a Grange team, you can run more Reapers than you felt like you could before, because he's dropping 2 Harvest Markers himself with Planting Master and generating a nice, real solid bank of 5 influence each turn for the team.
Very true. So you can have his almost 4 normal and 1 extra for the Constitution as well, not to mention the Harvest Markers going out at a very good rate. And help them out is always very useful. So that'll do quite nicely for a very solid sort of middle, like an anchor point for the midfield. And I guess the next one to mention here would be Harrow.
So Harrow and Tater we can talk about pretty quickly together, really, because they're both have only been affected by the Charmed change. So they both lost Charmed, and Harrow, because Harrow's came up so rarely that it didn't come up much at all because it was only against animals, is that we felt that he could have his defense bumped up from 3 to 4, but we have to realize that we couldn't just do that with 19 boxes as well. So we dropped his health down to account for that defense increase. So, so it's not necessarily I don't know if it's a big balance change. If anything, it's a slight boost upwards, if anything at all. But it's roughly similar to where he was in the sense that he's got a static defense of 4 now, but he only has 17 boxes instead of 19. Tater's had a similar change. He has not had, well, no, it's a different change actually. He has not had his defense affected because defense 5 Tater all the time would not be okay. But he's gained 2 boxes of health instead. So he doesn't have his charm female anymore, but he's now gone from 16 boxes to 18 boxes.
Yeah. So they both had, almost the same type of change in 2 different ways.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And then we're done with all the farmers. So I guess we go to the machine plant next. I almost got it again. Anyway, that would be a Rivet. I know there's a bit of people talking about engineers, what's happening with them. And I guess Rivet would be one of the real tricky ones, I suppose, in a sense, how she was designed. But I think it seems like you solved it fairly well, I think.
Yeah, it's Rivet's really, really close to being cool. Really close to being exactly right. And it's interesting, this change to Rivet doesn't actually affect Rivet herself much at all. It affects the team she brings with her. And it's mainly a rewording of how Follow My Lead works. Instead of making everyone else match her attack of 6, it increases everyone else's attack by +1. And what this does is it does 3 things. One is it means that Spade with Rivet will be attack 5 instead of attack 6. It means that Original Velocity will be attack 5 instead of attack 6. And it means that Veteran Velocity will be attack 7 instead of attack 6. So it kind of nerfs 2 players and it buffs one other player that we weren't seeing very much use with. One of the unexpected side effects that we didn't anticipate with Spade and Original Velocity is that they would have such incredible control over maneuvering your players around and being able to scoop players out of teams with the double push, double dodge, and the push dodge on normal velocity and just drag them across the whole field, and a similar kind of impact with Spade, albeit with a 2-inch mana zone instead. So this is not so much of a nerf. This is not a nerf to Rivet herself, but this is a nerf to the striking elements of Rivet's team and just bringing us back into lineup slightly.
Yeah, I saw some cheeky comments on one of our gaming groups talking about that Rivet's heroic play is better than some people's or some other captains' legendary plays. But I'm not sure yet. Sturdy is, however, a very good aura, though.
It's very good, certainly very good. It's quite small. I think it's quite appropriate for a strong heroic. It's a very small aura, in the fact it's 4 inches rather than 6, as a lot of legendaries are. But the fact that you get to use it each turn makes it very, very powerful indeed. Certainly not to get away from that. But it's ultimately making up for the fact that she doesn't have a legendary play. So, captain level heroics generally are quite good.
That they are. We're moving towards my favorite part. That would be alchemists, but we have another 2 to go before we get that far, and that will be brewers. And let's go start with the captain. Just get him done. Tapper, he's got a few little interesting tidbits.
Yeah. So this is another one. It's not a full rework, but this is actually, interestingly, Tapper going back in time a little bit, because he used to have Mark Target a long time ago. Then at start of season 4, we swapped it out for Stand Firm. And what we didn't realize actually is that it's a small accident that we made, a small mistake that we made, sorry, is that we took Mark Target off when Mark Target was range 8, and then Mark Target went to range 10 when it was already off Tapper's card. We just hadn't really had the realization that it was such a much more powerful ability when it had that +2 range on him, and just combining it with damage playbook results mean that you can have it quite happily on a wrap, or if you roll quite low, you don't feel so bad about just taking that 1 non-relentless damage anymore. You can do it with a Mark Target to buff somebody else, and then it stacked quite nicely with Barroom Brawl. And that's what we're trying to do with Tapper, really, to make him stand out from Corker and from Estes, is that Tapper is the one of the 3 captains that really wants to personally go in and start the fight himself. Corker and Estes can do that, but they don't want to do it quite as often as Tapper does. He really wants to be in the middle of it, get that commanding aura up, get a number of enemy models knocked down, and start beating people's heads in. So, and Barroom Brawl just it really pushes you to want to do that playstyle even more because you want to get Tapper right in the middle of the mix, and then start having these cost 1 charges with the rest of your team following him up, charging into commanding aura and beating the living daylights out of the enemy team. And at the same time as well, increasing the range of old Jakes means that Tapper can do this, can jump into the enemy team and still probably be within range of some friendly models to give them the influence from old Jakes and then have them follow him up into the melee.
It's very true. So he can actually get into the fray to get his momentum before the heroic play comes off.
Exactly, and he'd still be in range to be able to give them that extra influence.
Mm-hmm. That makes good sense. I think he's definitely a brawler. You can definitely call him that now. Any proper football hooligan would be proud of him, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but we have our burning friend in Stoker before we cover Corker.
So, Corker's quite a simple one, actually, in that he's just a phrasing tweak. He hasn't had a balance change so much as we've rephrased how his defensive ability works when he gets hit and does a push on himself. So it doesn't trigger on parting blows anymore. I think it only triggers when, not whilst making an advance. So he can't just like skirt off parting blows and other kinds of things like he was doing before. Just to make sure that it's working on properly. Stoker, we want to make him a little bit more independent, or I guess self-sufficient, I guess is a better word, because since Estes doesn't have Fire Blast anymore, that he needs to be setting people on fire himself and doing all the work for himself. And there's 2 ways in which we did that. One is Human Ball of Fire now gives him an ever so slight movement buff, so he gets a slightly easier time getting into base contact with enemy models to set them on fire. And he also has a nice armor debuff, which I don't think the Brewers actually had access to before. I think they had defense debuffs, but not armor debuffs in Searing Strike, which will lower their armor and set them on fire to increase Stoker's damage output.
True. I think there's a couple of happy people that have been envying Blacksmith for a little while for that ability.
Yeah, and it's got quite a nice storied background-driven reason for that change as well, because obviously Stoker used to be a blacksmith, so bringing over a little bit of stolen knowledge is actually quite a nice way of showing that link as well in the game.
So we're actually almost there. But now we have the vicious trio of the blacksmiths. So some people will probably love you, some will hate you. That's a good question. Who will do what afterwards? But yes. I probably have to talk them through all of them, I guess, at more or less the same time, since they are very closely related. All the changes that are done. Yes,
indeed. The blacksmith is quite an odd one because. This is a good example for showing that we don't just base our changes off statistics and data from the game. Because if you look at the Longshanks win rates for the blacksmiths overall, they're actually not that high. I think it's in the high 40s. They're not one of the highest teams out there, not by a long stretch. But once you start getting towards the higher tables of play, the players that are doing very well at blacksmiths, our recently hired Steamforge Game staff, Fraser McFratridge, is a great example of this because he has an incredibly high win rate with his blacksmiths. Has won multiple national championships with them. And it's not the reason for these changes, but it's a good example of why we're making the changes because of the specific playstyle being employed by Fraser and some other people as well. And it's incredibly defensive and very hard to break into unless you have specific tools at your disposal, like Scalpel. And Anvil was kind of the cornerstone of doing that. So Anvil kind of the cornerstone of that, in that on his legendary turn in particular, he was providing you this team that was it's a very tough turtle to break down because it all had tough hide. And then on top of that, you couldn't even break it out of its defensive auras very easily because it also all had stoic. So instead of just removing straight up one half of that, or what we've actually done is kind of split it in half, is that the apprentices that really need that tough hide because they have the low health pools have got to keep the tough hide that is granted by his captain level legendary. However, the masters that are in his legendary aura only gain the stoic, so the apprentices don't gain stoic anymore, and the masters don't gain tough hide anymore. So they can't be moved as easily. This will hopefully keep the defensive auras in place. But at the same time, the apprentices can't be killed as easily because of the tough hide. So this should still make it a strong, solid legendary, but without being completely impervious to enemy attack.
You also had made the change for both for Sledge and Fairies as well.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I just had a cat with a big tail in the face here.
Gotcha. So Sledge one of the highest damage output models in the game, simply put. It's at least for a single target anyway. And that was just coming a little bit too easy to him because of powerful charge as well, where he's knocking down enemy models when he charged them. And kind of the justification for him going down to a 1-inch melee zone is that powerful charge, is the fact that he can just charge into a model to then ensure that its counterattack does nothing to him at all, because they won't get to make it because they're knocked down. And it's enabling him having his super high damage. It just also means that he's going to have to think a little bit more carefully about how and when he's going to walk out of those defensive auras. And the couple of people I've spoken to about this already, obviously I've done a couple of media interviews before this one, and I've done obviously spoken a lot to my playtest, and they go, oh well, but no one likes losing a 2-inch melee zone. No one ever likes losing a 2-inch melee zone. They go, oh, I don't like losing a 2-inch melee zone sledge. Right, but will you still play him? Well, yes, obviously. Well, all right, okay then. Well, then obviously he can afford to lose it because he still, and as I say, he still has that enormous damage output per hit.
Well, it does. I didn't really think much of it when I saw it, in my own opinion anyway. So more like, yeah, he probably needed that.
Yes, absolutely. Although I would say that because, I made this errata.
That's very true. Because I'm not exactly talking to a non-biased person in this case. Yeah?
Absolutely. I'm about as biased as they come right now.
And we have Ferris as well here. He gets a little small changes as well, just to make her a little not as easy to score with, perhaps.
Well, yeah, it's twofold, because we've hit both sides of the legendary for Ferris. We've taken the extra range off both the personal side of the legendary and the captain side of the legendary. And the personal side of the legendary with the range we've taken off because with 1 influence and her legendary, Ferris has a 20-inch goal threat range, which is the 1 influence to sprint, 6-inch goal kick in this kick stat normally, buffed to 8 inches by the old legendary, and then up to 10 inches roughly by using Give It a Whack. That's a very long threat range for 1 influence. And was just meaning you could give 1 influence to Ferris, and then if the ball happened to scatter anywhere near her, she could scoop it up and score a goal quite happily.
Yeah.
Which is pretty effective, and a little bit too effective, honestly. And the captain side legendary was more to do with there's quite a prevalent playstyle where receiving with Ferris and legendarying on the first turn just to give your team a boatload of momentum and position because of free dodges or momentum dodges, or be just using it to bank it to go first in the following turn. Mm-hmm. Just making that a little bit more difficult to pull off because you've got shorter kick ranges for everybody, and also making sure that the tap-in ranges aren't as easily to trigger either as well, because obviously reducing the range of a kick means that the tap-in range is also shorter. It's just making that a little bit more difficult for people.
Yeah.
So it's the same change for 2 slightly different reasons.
Yeah. So it's a small tune down, really.
Yes.
All right. So finally, we are here to my favorites. But sure, I'm definitely not non-biased in this. I am very biased and have an agenda and everything. So, but anyways, the least interesting part of Alchemists, which we should finally get to, would probably be Vitriol.
Yeah, just a phrasing change on Cologne there, which was basically just to sync it up with how it works properly with Resilience. That's all.
Yeah,
it was. I'm not quite sure how that got missed, but the phrasing was ever so slightly different to how Resilience works, so now that's not the case.
That's very true. So it's small and nifty and does all the work it needs to do. But okay, big boy. Before you start, just say thank you very much. These changes to those to Catalyst and Midas actually is enough for me to start really wanting to really start playing them again. So yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say that I'm going to marry you, but I'll certainly have relations. Let's see.
You can happily buy me drinks at WTC if you're there.
I'll be sure to make sure you get a drink. But in any case, let's have a go at Veteran Catalyst. So the lovely big boy is back in action.
Yes, indeed. Yes, he is. So Veteran Catalyst is an interesting place because he's got to be the singular high damage output model in a guild that doesn't really have high damage output overall, in terms of melee damage anyway. Mm-hmm. And we also need to kind of keep him being a bit paper thin, because the Alchemists are also not meant to be a very tough, resilient guild. That's quite unusual for a big model. The damage output, not so much, but they're not being super resilient is definitely not standard. So doing that in a way that still works and is in a way that you still want to take him is quite interesting and challenging. And I think we've managed to do that now, just firstly by increasing his damage output overall with burst of fumes. So he's dealing 2 condition damage every single time he makes an attack to everything around him that's suffering condition. It's like a super intensify because it's condition damage. And his health as well. Sorry. So his health gone up by 2. So still a glass cannon because he still has defense 2 on 1. And nothing else really helping him soak up damage, just a big lump of health. So, but going up by 2 boxes will help him a little bit out there. And then toxicity being the other element of it as well. So even though he doesn't have a sort of resilience buffs in terms of how he soaks up damage, toxicity means people won't just quite so easily leave loads of models around him, because each time they end an activation there, they'll take that 2 condition damage and poison. And if that happens before Catalyst is activated, they're in for a world of pain.
That is very true. As he will hit them back, even on a 1, he'll do 3 damage.
Yes, indeed.
So, not to mention the fact if he does hit his 6, he'll be fairly close to Sledge in that kind of a sense.
Yeah, for sure. And if he ever hits his ground pound just naturally off his playbook, then everything around him might as well just be dead.
Or at least they wish they were.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that would be 2 damage and a push, and then that's
Well, it all stacks up quite nicely, because if he hits off his playbook, that means that they've been hit by obviously the 2 damage and knockdown from the ground pound. You probably don't push them away unless there's some specific reason why you want to. But the 2 damage and the knockdown, and because they've been hit by the 2 damage, they'll suffer the poison. Because they've been poisoned, they'll suffer burst of fumes. So that's 4 damage and poison and knockdown. So. And then because they've been knocked down, he's way more likely to do it again.
Then he can get some really nice witness me off in between there, just because why not? So it's a very interesting kit. So definitely if he gets, as long as he's semi-protected, at least that's what I have found, that as long as he's okay protected, he doesn't need a lot. Usually, for my sake, I'm using Venom and the little snake. God damn, I can't remember. Yeah. That generally, just make sure that they're not too far away and make sure he's reasonably safe. Then he can go to town on anyone. But minus, there can't really be an update at any point during since season 1. It seems like that. Something needs to change with Midas. And, think you hit him yet?
We'll get there with him. I think this is one of the smallest sets of changes that he's had, because we haven't changed his core playstyle at all. He hasn't really had any of his abilities or majorly change. I guess obviously on the front of his card, acrobatics has become where they go, but they're still ultimately doing the same job. It's influence expenditure for a dodge. It's just a longer dodge. But so we didn't really want to change how he operated. We just wanted to make him better at his job. So acrobatics changing to where they go. It's a really nice threat extension that he's going to love. Momentous tackle being on the first column of his playbook instead of a non-momentous tackle. Very, very handy to have, which will, because of fulmination, be a momentous tackle dodge. And then giving fulmination out to all the friendly models within the pulse of his legendary play is going to, for 1 turn, turn his whole team into the super dodgy nightmare that's going to be a real problem to stop. And so it should hopefully make Midas one of these really premier high-tempo goal-scoring pieces once again they used to be.
Well, one that I sort of saw, and the first thing I looked at when I had this is just finally I can trigger a proper dodge, so to say, of my playbook.
Yeah.
And have something to do in the 3-4 hit range that feels like it means something.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the first thing that I saw when I looked at this card, and just felt, okay, and finally I can choose results 3 and 4 for a reason that isn't I'll generally always use 1 or 2 almost all the time, because he's not a damage guy, honestly. He just isn't. But of course on the 6, the double dodge, double push, that's always a sweet spot to get to.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and a fantastic result as well. And with Fulmination, you've got 5-inch dodge there out of where they go, and a triple dodge double push on the 6th column if you have Fulmination up, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is, and definitely in Fairy Tale land. And my God, he can move fast. Not that he really does that already, but Jesus.
Yeah.
But yeah, now his 3 with Lure of Gold, it was okay. You could use it in a few occasions, but now choosing the 3 result when you have Vertigo as an option really makes a difference, at least for me.
For sure. And Lure of Gold's still good as well in a lot of situations as well. It's just you've got a better kit around it to make use of it as well. It's not the only part of this card. It's good.
Yeah, just bringing with me a player up in the general area is always a good little thing.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly, I think we've gotten actually through. Did we get through every single Errata change now?
I think so. Let me double check. We didn't really cover the cooks much because there'll be a blog out before this podcast. But yeah, other than that, we've been through every card.
Yeah, damn, that was about time. Whew. Well, anyway, we got through it.
Mm-hmm.
All 43 cards changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a very respectable amount for a 6-month Errata, I'd say.
Yeah, well, as I said, we mentioned earlier on that there's a lot of those cards in there that have very minor changes. The charmed ones are great examples of that. So just meant that we could broaden our horizons really in terms of the total number of models that we affected.
No, definitely. So, okay, now that we've gone through every single card, I have an agenda because I'm an Alchemist player and that there's been some hints about Cammy before. I need to talk about her at least for a little bit, and at least I need to have tried. Now that I have you here, then I need to have tried to get something out of you. So, Kami, can you say anything about this amazing little tidbit? You might maybe also want to remind people what we already know about her from an earlier talk or an earlier showing at, I don't quite even remember when.
It was at the first Vengeance of the year. I think it was Vengeance 4, which was, I'm thinking, sort of March, April time this year. So we did a little bit of I did a little bit of a small presentation there in the evening on Saturday. And what I was doing was I was showing off some of the individual abilities from some of the Free Cities draft models. And one of the ones I showed was from Cammy, which was the Chemical Ordnance character play, which was, I believe, is range 6 and does 1 condition damage to the enemy model that you hit. And they also suffer either the burning or the poison condition at your choice. Now, the thing that makes that super interesting is that it doesn't have a influence cost. It only has a Guild Ball character play. And what I noted in addition to that, as I was talking, it wasn't something that was shown written down, but I spoke about it when I had the microphone, was that she also has a character trait on the back of a card that allows her, just as Fulmination allows Midas to add a dodge result to every attack that he makes, is in that Cammy has a character trait that allows her to add a Guild Ball result to every single attack that she makes, which means that she's triggering Chemical Ordnance every single time she makes another attack, provided that she's successful and gets hits. And she does also have natural Guild Ball results on her playbook, I believe. So she'll be able to actually go Guild Ball results on the playbook to do 1 damage, and then Guild Ball result on the back of her playbook, do a 2nd point damage, or damage someone different, and spread the condition level all over the place. So while I won't talk specifically about more abilities, because you've got 2 quite good ones there, is I'll talk more generally about how she plays, and that she's kind of like Edge, but with guns, in the fact that she has a very high amount of mobility, but also has a capacity to strike out and hit at a distance as well with her Chemical Ordnance. So she's kind of like an Alchemist version of Edge in that sense. So very, very high pace, quite good with the ball, a little bit fragile, but can also shoot people in the face.
Yeah, so rod and gun, that sounds like a decent description of her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that sounds very good. It's a very cool ability or description of the playstyle, and I think that will. I think I'll quite enjoy when she comes out. You wouldn't happen to have a general idea when they're supposed to come out?
So the remaining Free Cities draft models are generally timed for release around the same time as their legacy team. And if you remember the video that Rich Loxton did a couple of months ago, I think it was now, then he mentioned that the Alchemist legacy team is due out in September, which would be a good time to have in your mind for when Cammy is going to hit the tables.
So around my birthday, that sounds like a good birthday coming up then.
Ah, yeah. Obviously, we did that on purpose. That was obviously lined up entirely because of you, so you're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, excellent. But yeah, thank you very much for having the time to come by and talking to us all. And I have an editing job of proportion ahead of me. So thank you very much for coming by, Perkins.
And thank you for taking the time to do this Errata review with us. It's been a pleasure.
We're done. We're back out again. We actually sitting in the same place as before. Oh well, fair enough. We've just gone through all the cards and even got a few little things about Kami. Nice. I look forward to having a good go with her, and that will be for the next one. So that's actually next month. It's good times. Good times. Well, all good things come to an end, so thank you for coming with us through the entire Errata. If you're still here, that's impressive. It was a heck of a long one. Click, share, and subscribe, and do all the good things for us. Please have a support on us on Patreon, and we'll definitely see you for the next videos. And it's always a lovely time with you all. Handy viewers as you are. Haha, I stole it, Rich. Bye. Have a good day.